This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details. Hello everyone and welcome to NWR TV. I'm John Rairdin, and joining me from Flippfly is Aaron Filippo, who currently is working on Whisker Squadron, which is on Kickstarter right now. Aaron, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Before we get into Whisker Squadron, I wanted to get some quick background just on you in general. What's sort of your history with games and in the games industry?
Sure, I've been working in games for, I guess, about 15 years now. I started in AAA over at Raven Software and, worked on Marvel games and then Call of Duty. And then I quit to start Flippfly with my brother. I guess 8 years ago now, just over 8 years ago. And we made Race the Sun, then a game called Evergarden, and helped bring Absolute Drift to the consoles. And then Whisker Squadron is our newest thing.
What's like your elevator pitch for Whisker Squadron when you have to explain it to somebody really quickly?
Oh man, putting me on the spot. I don't know if I've nailed it down to one sentence, but I guess I'd say it's like a forward-moving aerial roguelike, so I guess one way to explain it to your viewers that might make sense is just it's like a procedural generated Star Fox. It's kind of the gist.
It's one of the weird genres with like Metroid and Castlevania where the genre is sort of also a game in the genre.
Mm-hmm.
Like there isn't, when you say like rail shooter, that covers light gun games and everything, so you almost have to say it's like Star Fox to kind of get people like, oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, not a lot of games have kind of like repeated that like corridor. And I avoid calling it a rail shooter because rail shooter to me implies that like you don't have any movement control and it's just aiming like, Area 51 style, so it makes it feel more constrained than it actually is.
Yeah, it's a weirdly unpopulated subgenre. So I don't remember exactly how you and I started talking, but about like a year ago, I remember you tweeting that you were interested in doing something Star Fox-like. What was the catalyst? Why did you wake up one day and decide like, I want to do this? Or like why, since it is kind of like an unpopulated genre, this isn't 16-bit Metroidvanias, which I get 12 PR emails about per day. What made you want to do this particular thing?
Well, you may know that, Race the Sun was hugely inspired by Star Fox. That was just a hugely influential game for me. And, so ever since we put Race the Sun out, I've kind of wanted to explore something that was a little bit more in that genre directly, more combat, more of a fixed mission structure. So it's kind of something that's been in the back of my head for a while. And I guess last spring I was just feeling a little bored and wanted to try something else. So yeah, I just tweeted out like, hey, I could make a Race the Sun Star Fox mashup. Would you be interested in that? And I think I put something out that said like, if this gets 200 tweets or retweets, then I'll spend a week on it or something like that. And I got that. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll spend a week on it.
Yeah. I think I might have been one of them. So you talked about, you came off of Race the Sun. This started as you were literally modifying Race the Sun to make this, right? Is that coming from someone with like no game development knowledge at all? Is that a normal way to start a game, like working from another game, or is that sort of strange?
Yeah, that kind of surprised me when I started in the game industry. Like, I worked on X-Men Legends 2, and then when we switched over to Marvel Ultimate Alliance, it was literally just like copy and paste the project repo and rename it to something else, and then over the course of the first few months, you're replacing all those core assets and removing the stuff that you're not going to have in the new game. So yeah, and I'm Call of Duty, same kind of thing. It's like, okay, this this game started with this other one as its kind of root, and then they modify from there.
So almost every time that Nintendo has taken on a new Star Fox game themselves, they've largely just reimagined the first one kind of over and over again. Like they made Star Fox, and then Star Fox 64 was that same plot and a lot of the same levels.
Right.
They then went back to it with Star Fox 64 3D, and Star Fox Zero was also just kind of that same plot and levels. Do you think that there's room to grow within this genre without leaving that sort of rail line design? Like a lot of times when they've tried to expand on Star Fox, they've gone, oh, we need to add all range mode, or we need to add ground missions.
Right.
Do you think there's room to do new things just within that rail line kind of structure?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be honest, it's hard to get away from the fact that we're heavily inspired by Star Fox, but we're also not saying like, okay, we're making a Star Fox
Right.
It definitely has elements of Race of Sun and has elements of Star Fox, but also we're heavily inspired by other games we've played recently, like FTL and Slay the Spire and other things like that. So there's definitely a very rich design space there, kind of like if you look at what was Spelunky to Super Mario Brothers, clearly there's some inspiration and roots there, but nobody thinks Super Mario Brothers is really like Spelunky at all, even though it's the same basic format. You've got 8 worlds or whatever that you're gonna go through, and then there's some boss at the end. But it feels totally different. A totally different difficulty curve, and the randomization makes it feel special somehow. So I'm definitely trying. We're not holding ourselves back at all in terms of trying new things. We're just trying to push things in interesting directions. I'm going to sound like a heretic, but I haven't played much Star Fox beyond the original Super NES one. That was kind of like a hugely defining game for me. But when I played Star Fox 64, I know that's everybody's favorite. I didn't like it as much. And I think to me, the innovation that Miyamoto brought to the original Star Fox, which was we're going to put you in a corridor and just not make you have to worry about your position in 3D space beyond essentially 2D, I think that was really interesting because it just lets you focus on the cinematic moments of those fights and stuff, Whereas, with Star Fox 64 and the all range mode, it was it's really easy to get into situations like in that first boss fight, for instance, where it just wasn't that fun, and you're in this tiny little corridor and you're flying and you have to do the giant barrel roll thing to turn around and get back to the boss, and if you do it wrong, you turn around and then you're already passing him, and it's okay, 2 more shots, now I got to go this turn around thing, and so it's just 2 seconds of action followed by 10 seconds of this navigation thing that kind of feels weird and out of place. So this is just my controversial opinion, but I think that it's really smart to just kind of figure out what your constraints are and then figure out what you want to do in that space. So yeah, we've been really deliberate about that stuff.
No, that is completely fair. It does kind of go against the added complexity, sort of goes against the brilliance of the original design in some places.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it does seem like maybe it was just the collective boredom of 2020, but we've seen a few different games sort of in this style suddenly go into development. It went from being a genre that nobody was looking at to a genre that seems to sort of be gaining some popularity among indie developers. And what's cool is it seems like everyone's doing different things with it. Do you think there's the potential for this genre to sort of be like I mentioned how every day I go into my email and see PR for 12 different 16-bit Metroidvanias, and now 3D platformers I think are getting more popular with indie developers. Do you think that this has the potential to be sort of a thing that could sort of be the next big thing with indie developers for indie genres?
Man, I don't know. That's hard to say. I think it's always hard to predict those trends because you innovate in an area or you do something that people haven't seen in a while, and then usually the first person to do that isn't very successful, and then other ones that follow in their tracks can be more. When we put Race the Sun out on Steam, it's not that we were the first game to do like endless racing, dodging obstacles and stuff like that. Like there were some Flash games that had done that years ago, and um, a few other similar games like way, way long ago. But nobody had a game like that on Steam. So suddenly it was almost like we created a mini genre or something like that. Um, and then we brought it to mobile, and there was a bunch of clones on mobile. So I don't know. I I think it'll always be a niche thing, to be honest, because it's not. I don't know. There's a big genres like first person shooters and flight sims. It just seem like there's such a inherent built-in audience for those things because they just relate to these real world phenomena. And Star Fox was always just this weird concept where it's like, well, you're a group of animals that are fighting against robots and you're playing in these corridors. It was really a weird concept for a game. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure if we'll ever break out of that or not, but I guess we'll see.
So talking about sort of the more the specifics of what Whisker Squadron is doing differently, your levels are all procedural. I'd imagine that if you just hand a computer a bunch of obstacles and enemies, though, it would tend to give you levels that may very well be impossible for a human being to beat. Is there a challenge in giving a computer the tools to make a level in a way that will still be not only playable but have the sort of flow to it that I would assume you'd be looking for? And how do you address that? How do you keep it from making literally like an impossible gauntlet of obstacles?
Yeah, so we're using a similar method for this game that we used in Race of Sun, which is we hand design these little chunks of level, and that includes like the specific placement of objects and enemy spawners and stuff like that. And then there's a little bit of randomization within those. So like this spawner might be a death kite, we call it, or it might be a tank or something like that, or maybe it'll be a turret. But it's always going to be like one of those things, or maybe nothing. And then there's some modification of that with difficulty settings as well. And then the game will kind of randomly stitch those patterns together while you play. And so in a given run, you might see 10 out of a possible 40 patterns or something like that, kind of randomly stitched together. And then within those patterns, you'll see some randomization that changes a little bit. But you will kind of learn to recognize like what the individual patterns look like. And so, if you played Race of Sun, you would recognize like, oh, it's a tunnel. I know how this tunnel goes now because I've done it lots of times before. But if you play the next round or the next day, you might not see that same tunnel there. So it's kind of a balancing act of like making it possible to learn these patterns that are really fun to learn, but also making it feel somewhat unique every time. And then the other system that we're developing for this game are procedural bosses. And so it's a similar concept, just implemented in a different context. So, we've got like a frame, a basic frame for a boss, and this thing has some scripts on it that define certain movement patterns and stuff like that. And then there's lots of little attachments that kind of get added on to it, and those are kind of like what's procedural about it. And then those attachments kind of have the like little doodads that change up every time too. So you might encounter a boss once, and it'll be shooting lasers out of all sides, and then the next time it has some kind of a missile launcher or something that throws cubes at you or something along those lines. Um, and that system is still a work in progress as well. So like we're going to have different overall frames that kind of behave differently. And so, but again, it's like if it were just a totally randomized mashup of things, that wouldn't necessarily be fun because one, it would be incoherent, but two, it's actually kind of fun to learn to recognize what these patterns are. And so it's kind of a mix of a balancing act of like how much do we want to throw at you that might be new every time, and how much do we want to like give you something to latch onto so that you can actually master this.
Has it have you has it ever given you a boss that was just impossible to beat? Like have you created just any evil monsters in the process?
Not impossible, but there's definitely some combinations where like there's one of these attachments that drops out little cubes, and the cubes kind of like spawn pillars. And
Yeah.
if you get like two of those and then another attachment that shoots out enemies, and you're kind of like dodging two of these procedural rows of pillars and enemies, and um, so we might have to tone down some of those combinations and say, okay, you can only have one of this class of thing attached to you at a time,
Sure.
But on the other hand, it's like that's kind of what's fun about roguelikes is that sometimes they just screw you over.
They can just,
So,
yeah. Well, that's, hard mode,
mhm.
right? So I think during, was it the Steam Winter Festival, you guys put out a public demo for Whisker Squadron?
Yeah.
Um, I was surprised uh, playing that demo. I kept expecting, like, oh, this will be like a couple levels. I was surprised by the scale of just that demo in a game that I assume, relatively speaking, you're still fairly early in development for. I mean, the precedent for this genre is pretty short, kind of arcade driven high score games. What is the overall scale goal for this? Is that dependent on the success of the Kickstarter? Do you have kind of like a minimum expansiveness you're looking for?
Yeah, it's I think that demo that we put out on the Steam Festival is probably about, in terms of length, it was probably about a third of what the campaign will be. Um, and so we've kind of roughly divided the game up into 3 acts, and we've mostly just been working on the first one so far, and the other two are mostly conceptual at this point. So, the end goal is that you'll be able to play through and beat a single run of the game in probably like 40 to 60 minutes or something like that. But it'll take you a while to be able to do that because it's
Sure.
kind of hard, So, and then once you beat the game, we're developing a whole system of mods, which wasn't present in that demo, but basically you'll unlock new mods by achieving certain things, and then those will let you like modify the game in other ways. So right now the mods are mostly centered around just like making the game more difficult, So you might unlock a mod that doubles the damage that bosses do or something like that. Um,
Sure.
but we're also looking at ones that would just like change up the color scheme or change out this enemy for this other one or something like that. And just,
Sure.
so you've beat the game on that mode. Now try it on this other one.
Yeah.
And then we're also working on an endless mode, probably. So, we've got procedural bosses and, all these like tools to make procedural levels. So we'll probably come up with something where it's like a high score based endless mode that just gets progressively harder. Um, we'll also have daily challenges, so I mentioned that mod system. So a daily challenge will basically be like a fixed randomized seed with some randomized mods that everybody's playing at the same time. So that'll be interesting. We haven't really done that yet. Then we've got some other ideas for additional features too, but nothing nailed down yet. So
I assume maybe like online leaderboards for those challenges and
yeah, I think we'll probably have online leaderboards for the daily challenge and probably for the endless mode.
how big is your team working on this?
Yeah, it's not super big. So I am, I'm the co-owner of Flippfly now. My brother's kind of moved on to do his own creative pursuits, and then Sean Campbell is my design collaborator. So he's doing all the world design and pretty much all the visual development as well. Jin Lee, she's an artist from Sydney, Australia, and she's doing like all the character art and concept designs for objects and enemies and stuff like that. And then we just brought on Chris Atkins. He's a part-time programmer. And then Shell Wong is doing the soundtrack. And we might grow our team a little bit more. I don't have any solid announcements yet, but we're kind of looking into whether we might want to bring on a writer or not. So
And you mentioned like the artwork, and I saw you post the other day. Now, granted, this interview is going up a little while after recording it, so apologies to viewers that I'm referencing older stuff. But I saw you post the other day. I think one of the character animations for, I assume, like communication of just like basic mouth movement. I think the look of the character art is really cool. It has a kind of a retro look to it. Are there any specific influences for kind of the art design, both of the actual graphics and then like the 2D art that you're looking at?
sure, well, I can talk about the in-game stuff first. So I think Race the Sun we kind of built deliberately to be a minimalist sort of feel. And the only like actual 3D model in the game that was like modeled in a 3D modeling application was the ship. And everything else was built within this like custom level editor that we made, where you build up everything out of like cubes and sphere primitives and stuff like that. We just continued using that tool for this game. So, it's deliberately low poly. I'm kind of a sucker for that like super low poly, no texture look that the original Star Fox had, because I think it's kind of timeless.
Absolutely.
I kind of think like the worst period in gaming history was when developers realized they could like put textures on things, but we didn't have like the memory to actually put good textures on it. So it was just like very much that Star Fox 64. Like, okay, in Super NES, it was like a building was a cube and it didn't look like a building, but you could imagine it, And then in the 64 version, it was like, well, let's put some crappy blurry windows on there, and now it looks like like we're actually trying to make a building, So yeah, we don't really use textures much, and it's kind of just been an iterative process, to be honest. Sean comes from more of a level design background, but he's more he leans more into the visual development than I do, so he's kind of been leading the way on that. But we've kind of had lots of back and forth about like, well, what if we put outlines on things, and what if we, do we want it to be more or less colorful, and do we want skyboxes with texture in them or not? So, by the time the thing ships, it might look a little different again, but it's kind of like somewhat minimalist, but also not trying to be like particularly retro, I guess. And then as far as the 2D art, you'd have to ask Jen about that, but I know she's heavily influenced by Studio Ghibli and other anime. Like one of the characters was inspired heavily by Porco Rosso from Studio Ghibli. So yeah, it was that, and I kind of, I think what I told her when we were getting started was like, I kind of like that old 1980s and 90s like Saturday morning cartoon vibe, where it's like, if you're a 12-year-old kid, like it looks like the most badass thing ever, but it's also like doesn't take itself too seriously,
Yeah. Very important question that I don't know if you can answer yet. Are you doing for the characters voice acting or garbly Star Fox talk?
We were just talking about that yesterday, so we keep going back and forth on it. We're kind of like aggressively indie here in that if I can make a game with fewer people and without having to like introduce more complex things into our pipeline, then I will, so I hesitate to go down the road of like working with voice actors and stuff. Not so much that I couldn't see voices in the game, but it's like, if we have hundreds of lines of text in the game and like 10 characters, it's like, do we really want to grow that much, So
yeah.
So I lean more towards like, okay, what can we come up with in a day that'll solve this problem for us,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the Banjo-Kazooie or Animal Crossing style, blah, 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 that's probably what we're going to end up with. We're also like, we're kind of looking into whether we could like record actual cat noises or like,
that'd be great.
Cat chirps and meows and stuff, and then just kind of like maybe process them a little bit. So
yeah,
I know Chell is really interested in like kind of heading that up, and she's got some friends with cats and stuff. So maybe by the time you see this, we'll have like something figured out.
It's just an excuse to play with cats for like a long time. That's all it is.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see.
Kind of as we're wrapping things up here, do you think that had you stayed in AAA games, you'd ever be making anything remotely like this?
No. If I had stayed in AAA, I'd be working on Call of Duty right now. So
yeah,
that's how it would be. So
I think there were some Call of Duty games with spaceships.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I could maybe find my niche in there, and maybe I could convince them to make a little like corridor shooter section or something like that.
Please.
Yeah. I will say though, if Nintendo ever came to me and asked if Flippfly wanted to make a real actual Star Fox game, I would definitely take them up on that.
They went to the Crypt of the Necrodancer.
I know.
Folks, and we're like, do you want to make Zelda?
Yeah.
Which I can't imagine being those guys.
Right.
When Nintendo comes to you and asks you that.
Yeah. No, that would be a dream come true for sure.
Yeah. So obviously there's the Kickstarter that's going on, presumably right now when this video goes up. How else can people follow the production of Whisker Squadron and Flippfly in general?
Sure. Well, if you go to our website, flippfly.com, with 2 P's, you can sign up for our newsletter. So I always send out emails when we launch a thing. The game is on Steam. If you just look it up, you can wishlist it there. We're still looking at platforms, and so I've just been saying it's going to come out on PC and consoles, but we don't know exactly which consoles or when that might happen. So
presumably the Wii U, obviously,
yeah.
And then other stuff down the road.
Right. We hit that Ouya. So yeah, go to whiskersquadron.com though, and you'll see all those links to follow it.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I'm sure you're busy getting set up for the Kickstarter, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem at all.
This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.